Is Mexico safe? The short answer is, hey guys, how's it going? My name is Landon Bischoff. I just got back from a 2-year motorcycle adventure where I spent a year going through Central America, and I spent a year going through every single state in Mexico. So there's 32 of them, and we had quite the experience. When I tell people that I did that, easily the most common response I get is like this shock and wonder, and it normally is like, dude, how are you alive right now? And it's just always so curious to me because it's kind of like this attitude of just like, dude, you got so lucky that you are alive. And so today, guys, we are going to talk about the safety of Mexico. I know this will be a very controversial thing for many people because a lot of people have different opinions on it, but coming from somebody who has probably seen more of Mexico than 99% of people, I think I'm in a good spot to make this video, and I could easily spend just hours and hours talking about this. And so just really quickly, guys, I'll just give a quick background to myself, because if you're like me, people give value to the words spoken based on who is speaking them and not just the words themselves. My whole life, I've had a huge love for Mexican culture. I grew up in a little farm town in Southern California called Blythe. Growing up in Blythe, it's predominantly Latino, and so majority of my friends were Mexicans. And like I remember playing soccer in elementary school, and it was like always Chivas versus America. And my friends were always teaching me all these bad words in Spanish, and then I'd go to their house and then their moms would teach me like actually phrases that I could use. And they're trying to teach me El Commander and corridos, and just, man, I was submerged in Latin culture just from a really young age, and I liked it. When I was 18, I moved to Mexico actually for 2 years, and I was a missionary down there for my church. I spent those 2 years in the state of Chiapas and Oaxaca. And so those are in the very south, next to Guatemala part of Mexico. I spent time in cities, I spent time in little farming, fishing villages, and I even spent a year in Los Altos de Chiapas, which is an area above San Cristobal de las Casas. In that area, they actually speak a Mayan dialect. Their first language is not Spanish. And so in those 2 years, I learned Spanish as well as that Mayan dialect, Tzotzil. Very, very quickly when I got to Mexico, I realized there was a huge disconnect between just what Americans in general thought of Mexicans, and including myself. I had no idea, especially Mexicans that live in Mexico, because there's lots of Mexicans that live in the US. And so quickly when I moved to Mexico, you're living there. You're going and buying groceries, you have a day-to-day life. In fact, all you're doing is talking to people all day long. And so you just get such a crazy view of to what life is actually like in an area. After coming home from my mission, I just had so much gratitude in my heart, and I almost kind of just felt like I was indebted to just the people of Mexico for taking me in, loving me, and just taking such good care of me. And so after being back in the States for a while and kind of establishing myself in a sales career and just, starting my adulthood, I got to a point where I was ready. I had some money set aside and the time, and I was ready to kind of start my project. And the goal was I just wanted to try to bring back some respect to Mexicans in general. I did not want to go in and create some sort of agenda or falsify or create some sort of image. And so I thought the best way I could just show the raw, true nature of Mexico was to just simply go to every single state and visit it. Something I wanted to do anyways. I was curious about all these other places that I had heard of, and I thought this would be a good idea. I'll get my motorcycle. We'll spend, I thought, about 4 months going through all of it. That turned out to be way longer, but that was the idea. Let's go in and let's show people what it's like to be there. I did that, and you can literally on this YouTube channel go watch the entire trip. It's about 61 episodes. They're about 30 minutes each. You don't have to take my word for it, and you can kind of just go watch those videos and form your own opinion if you want as well. And at the same time, guys, before we kind of get into some of the stronger statements that I'm going to make, I just want to make a disclaimer that I am just one person. I don't hold a monopoly to absolute truth. My main goal of making this video is I just hope that this can serve as just another piece of data for you. And so anyways, this is just my experience and it's my opinion, and you should form your own. And then lastly, I want to talk to the person right now who would make the claim that, Landon, you are not from Mexico. You're not Mexican, and therefore you can't have an opinion on this because you don't even live there. And just kind of that line of thinking, I 1000% totally refute that. You absolutely can have an opinion about anywhere you visit. Mexico is a massive country. It's by area, it's the 14th biggest in the world. There's 140 million people that live there. To give you like some other size references, is like Spain is like 48 million. I think the entire UK is like 68. And so Mexico has a lot of people. And within all those people, just try to imagine how many different nuanced experiences and lives there are. In the same way that I would not claim that I know what it's like to live in Florida because I grew up in Southern California. And so no one person has the ability to represent a place, in my opinion, and people can try. There's people that can do a good job, but I do not speak for Mexico, but I do believe I can just share my opinion on what I saw there. With all that cleared up, guys, let's get into the juicy stuff. Is Mexico safe? The short answer is yes, Mexico is safe. But also no, Mexico is not safe. And so let me clarify. And I get it, like we want these quick, easy answers, black and white, just tell me how it is. And the reason this video is gonna be so long is because this is a complicated subject and there's a lot of people involved, and it would be a disservice to just throw out some whimsy little answer. And part of the reason why it's a complicated question is because being safe, or the feeling of being safe, is relative. If you and I were out in the middle of the ocean right now, swimming in the water, and all of a sudden we start to see these sharks come up on us. Me, I can't speak for you, but me, I'm gonna get scared. I'm definitely not gonna be considering myself safe in that moment. I'm gonna be freaking out, trying to figure out how to get back on the boat. Now, if Ocean Ramsey was there, she is not gonna have the same experience that you and I are gonna have, right? She has so much more knowledge and experience with sharks. Her interpretation of the situation is probably not gonna be coming out of a place of fear, and she might even be enjoying it, right? And that's because she has an understanding that we don't. That's just one example, but it highlights 2 points. One is that people can experience the same thing and have completely different responses to feeling safe. The shark is still dangerous, but Ocean Ramsey's response to it is probably not feeling unsafe, right? She knows when to get out of the water and when she can be in the water. And so when people throw that word out, is it safe? Like, what does it even mean? And so in this video, we're kind of gonna define safety in 2 ways. We're going to use the world standard for safety, and then we're also gonna kind of use like a personal standard of safety. Those are the 2 main ones. And so the world kind of already has a way of baseline and determining safety. And it's kind of the same way that like a real estate agent would derive or give a value to a home. And that is by comparables. And so when we go to sell a home, the real estate agent just looks around at our neighborhood. Okay, well that house sold for this and this house sold for that, so your home is probably worth this. The world does that as well in terms of a standard of safety. And the most reputable place to look at that data is by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And so they pull all these numbers from countries all over the world, pull them together, they send out surveys, they do a lot of work, put them in one spot into a form that you and I can observe them. And the specific report that you and I are going to be interested in today is a nation's national homicide rate. And that number, we normally view it as a homicide rate per 100,000 individuals in a nation. And the second definition of safety that we're going to be using is personal safety. And it's not like some scientific term, it's just the one that I've chosen to use. And I actually think personal safety is more of a better representation of what people are asking me in the first place, is like, is it safe? Most people, what they're trying to know is like, if I go there, can I be at peace? Do I have to be worried? Can I walk to the store and do I have to be worried about my life being at risk or getting robbed? And so these are kind of the more day-to-day applications of what it means to be safe. And I also just feel like this is the biggest miscommunication that we see and misunderstanding that I see when I talk to people about this, and especially people that disagree with me, is there is a huge difference between having an experience with fear or even having an experience with a life and death situation versus living in fear. Living in fear on a day-to-day basis is a completely different thing than having an experience once in a while that made you feel unsafe. And then the last distinction that I'm gonna make is that the question, is Mexico safe, is not really a good question. We kind of need to be more specific. And a better question would be, who in Mexico is safe? And so in this video, we're gonna mainly focus on two people. One, on Mexicans that live in Mexico, and two, tourists that visit the country. Are Mexicans who live in Mexico, are they safe? And I would just say that the data clearly shows on our worldwide kind of definition that the answer is no, they are not safe. But on the personal definition, in my opinion, I would say yes, they are. And so let's kind of look at some of the numbers. Last year in 2024, Mexico had a homicide rate of 20 per 100,000 individuals, and that kind of equates to roughly around 26,000 people. To give you an idea, historically, over the last 30 years, if you average those up, it's about 18 and a half. Mexico's worst year in that 30-year time frame was in 2018 when they had 30 people per 100,000. And so what does all this kind of mean, guys? We kind of, again, like the real estate agent, we need some reference points. And so let's kind of use some other countries to kind of establish in that. And so we'll start with the safest country in the world. So really quick, just in your head, we'll do a little pause. Try and guess where you think the world's safest country is. I feel like we're doing a little Dora the Explorer episode, and I'm waiting for you. The safest country in the world is Iceland. Their homicide rate is 1 per every 100,000. They only have like 400,000 people in that country, so that equates to around what? 3 to 4 people, right? They have 1 per every 100,000, so it's 3 to 4 people. And when you kind of think of that, like single digits, like that is kind of wild to think of. Last year in 2024, they reported like 8, and they're like freaking out. So that's the safest place. Recently in these past years, Jamaica has been kind of on the top for one of the most dangerous countries in the world, and their national homicide rate is around 60 per 100,000. In the US, it normally runs around 5 per 100,000. But with so many more people, that number is way bigger, right? And it's like closer to around 17,000 people. The highest the USA has ever had was 10 per 100,000, and that was in 1991. And then lastly, the global rate is 6 per 100,000. And so 8 billion people, that number comes out to be around 500,000 people, 500,000 homicides yearly in the entire world. And so again, if we define Mexico's safety on the global standard, it clearly, the numbers tell us that it definitely is not a safe place. I mean, it's sitting at 3 times the global average. However, guys, if we isolated Mexico and we start looking closer and closer within it, I personally believe there's a little bit of a different story. If you said, I live in North America, most people, when they hear that, they probably wouldn't get really scared. Oh, okay, they know where North America, oh, North America, right? But then if you said, all right, I live in the USA, okay, we're getting a little bit more zoomed in, you probably wouldn't get scared. If you're from Iceland, you might get a little bit scared, but you probably wouldn't get scared. Then we zoom into California, and you might have a different opinion there. And then we zoom into Los Angeles, and then your opinion might change a little bit more. And then I say, okay, in Los Angeles, let's zoom in more to Skid Row. And then within Skid Row, I want to zoom in on this tent on, I don't know, Fifth, we got over here, East 5th Street, and a line of like 100 tents down the row in Skid Row. The person living in that tent does not have the same experience as a person who literally 10 miles away from them in Beverly Hills. It's just not even remotely the same experience. And I think if you ask both of them, do you feel safe? I think you get a very, very different response. And so my point is, the specifics matter. And we're gonna go even more detail into this. And I think if you zoom out too much on, and not just this topic, but like if you zoom out too much and you just generalize, I think you set yourself up a lot of times for having a very disconnected and just wrong, potentially wrong conclusion on a place. And so like, for me to like just throw out a blanket statement of like an entire city is this way, or an entire state, the people are this way, or worse, an entire country, it just seems like to me kind of lazy, if I'm being honest. And so for Mexico, it does not help you guys when you have 7 out of 10 of the most dangerous cities in the world in your country. Like when we zoom in to just the city of Colima in the state of Colima, if we just zoom in to that little city alone, we will see a homicide rate of 140 per 100,000. Remember, Mexico is 20, but just that one city is 140. Like that's a lot. Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, Mexico, 117 out of 100,000. Zamora, 106. Manzanillo, which is also in Colima, 102. Tijuana, which is in Baja California, right below San Diego, 138. These places, like, they add up. What's even crazier, guys, is when you start thinking of like area, like geographically the size of these places. If you were to grab the top 10 most dangerous cities in Mexico and draw a circle around them and pick them up and put them all 10 of those cities next to each other, you would have an area of a place with 2,000 square miles. And to give you a picture of how big 2,000 square miles is, if we were to draw a circle around Phoenix, Arizona, from like Surprise, just from corner to corner, Cave Creek, Queen Creek, just around it, that is 2,000 square miles. And so it is wild to think how big Mexico, again, 14th biggest country in the world, would in an area the size of Phoenix is creating 30% of its homicide rate. That's crazy. That's a small area. And then we contrast that with a state like the Yucatan, which is where Chichen Itza is, the big Mayan ruins. You got Cancun over there, that's in Quintana Roo, but that peninsula, that part that has in the Gulf, that's where the Yucatan is. I don't know if it's like just too hot over there or what, but like they're kind of like Iceland. They're sitting consistently at like 1 to 2 on their homicide rate in the entire state. The state of Puebla, for example, a place that has 7 million people in it, in 2024, their homicide rate was like 4. That's crazy. Like, that's crazy. That's lower than the US average. It's probably got something to do with the fact that like there's so many freaking churches there. Like a record on like how many churches can you have in a square mile. Puebla, Mexico probably sets it. Their homicide rate has probably got something to do with it's just filled with a lot of really good Catholics, like just good people. My point is this though, guys. When we zoom into Mexico and we stop making this huge generalization, and I know, again, I'm not saying that it's a wrong thing. Again, compared to the world, it's dangerous. But on a personal level, when we start zooming in, I think we see a very different story within Mexico, that the majority of these homicide rates are being created in very, very tight packed areas against cartels in disputed land. Like that's where the most of this stuff is coming from. And that's a dangerous game to play. If you're working in that industry, that's a dangerous game.
Te salvas de la vida, te salvas mucho mejor. No te vayas a dejar tieso allá, porque ya ha habido muchos muertos allá.
Muchos muertos.
Muchos muertos. Es mejor regresar a tu casita, con la bendición de Dios, llegas bien en tu casa.
Está bien.
So to go back now, on a worldwide scale, I think the data clearly shows, compared to most countries, Mexico is not safe. Now, on a personal scale, I think when we look in and isolate these very small areas and look at the majority of the land mass and the majority of like the experience of most people on a day-to-day basis, I would argue that Mexico is a safe country for Mexicans that live there. If you went in person and you talked to Mexicans all over the place, which I have done, and you asked them and you just posed the question to them, hey, Do you think Mexico is safe? I would say 75% to 90% of Mexicans, they would say no, it's not safe. And now if you ask those same people, do you feel safe in Mexico? Like the emphasis on you right now in your house, like in your town, in your city, do you feel safe? I would argue that the majority, again, meaning it's like 75% to 90% of people, they would say yes, they feel safe. So something that was just a very common occurrence on my motorcycle trip was like, I'd be traveling, I'd get to this town and be like, well, hey, I'm talking to people, I'm gonna be going over here. And then they'd be like, oh, well, when you go over there, just make sure you be careful. Those people are a bit dangerous. And I'm like, well, what about here? Like, oh, no, here's okay. Here's okay. Yeah, we all know each other. This is a good place. And then, okay, well, I leave and I go to this place that they tell me to be careful. I get there and I get talking to those people. And then they're like, well, we don't know where you came from, but if you're going over to that place, back to where that same place, if you go back to over there in that direction, just be careful because those people, they're a bit dangerous. Okay, well, what about here? Oh, no, here we're all good. We all know each other. This is a good place. I cannot tell you how many times I have had that experience. Like everyone is just kind of pointing the finger and it's not their fault. I think a lot of that is from news articles and it's just the unknown. It's just so simple to do it because you hear stories, you don't know, and so it's scary. The unknown is scary. Where I've noticed the most hesitation to respond to that question is like, oh yeah, it's not safe, is amongst like very affluent Mexicans and just rich people, wealthier people. And the more disposable income these people have, they can go travel all throughout the Republic and they can kind of have these experiences and see for themselves like, oh, it was cool when we were over here. It was okay when we were over there. We loved it over here. Like they get to travel where I would say the majority of Mexicans do not travel around their own country. And if they do, it's to very specific places and they don't really wander around, and a lot of times it's to go see family. I'm generalizing, but the point is that amongst affluent Mexicans, you'll see a hesitation, and that's just because money affords you to mitigate, sometimes just completely remove certain risks in your life. And it can get you protection from these things that most people cannot. I just found that it was so hard, like so rare, to find a person who felt like they were living in constant fear of their life, who just could not be comfortable, who was scared to walk to the store every day, who's just living in terror, like a war zone, right? And that's kind of like how people imagine it when they just act surprised that you are alive. It's just like, it's a war zone, it's on fire, it's burning to the ground, that country. And my experience is just not true, Of course, there's dangerous areas, and I have been through them. Again, I've been through every single state, and to be completely honest with you, like I will admit, like that I definitely like risked my life a little bit going through these places. I'm talking about like the Golden Triangle, the Sierra Madre above Culiacan, and like Teoltita on the border of Sinaloa and Durango, and just like these mountain towns where I'm driving past like convoys of black Suburbans with no license plates, or riding through all the avocado orchards near Europa and Michoacan. I had an experience where I was taken by a cartel. Like I was taken, I was not allowed to leave, like everything searched, like you're coming with us. The whole deal, I ended up spending the night there. In total, I maybe have like 8 different like interactions with different cartels throughout Mexico. The sum total of those experiences for me was all positive. Like I got to talk to them and learn a lot from them. And that's a whole nother subject. If people want to hear about that, we can talk about it a different day, but let's keep going. Now, I don't recommend anyone to just like go and ride motorcycles or like walking around through cartel lands. I don't recommend it at all. I was following a route, again, weaving my way through every state, and I was following a very strict set of rules that I'd set for myself. It's not like I was just like, like touristy guy in this place, I did it in a very strategic way. And I also felt I had a lot of skills that would give me an advantage. I speak fluent Spanish. You know, I can communicate to these guys when they ask me, what the hell are you doing here? And I also have a huge advantage for being white. Undoubtedly, if I was Mexican, I would definitely not do that. And that's not to say you can't travel to any state in Mexico. What I'm saying is, if you're Mexican, you should not go creeping down, random dirt roads in these zonas calientes, right? And most people don't care to do that either. And so to drive home this point of, is Mexico safe for Mexicans? I would say it is. And so we'll look at it this way. Remember, the homicide rate in Mexico is 20 per every 100,000 people. And so let's just try to understand what that number means. 20 out of 1,000, that's 2%. 20 out of 10,000, that's 0.2%. And 20 out of 100,000, that is 0.02%. To me, when I hear 0.02% of like losing my life in a homicide, like, I'm not worried about that. Just being frank. I don't think that would merit me living in constant terror. Now, where things really change and where things get really screwed up, again, is it depends where you live. And so your odds change drastically if you live in Colima. Your odds change drastically if you're in Ciudad Juarez or in Tijuana, right? And then if you start hanging around dangerous groups of people, your odds go up even more. And so my experience with the majority of Mexicans living in Mexico is it's just not the case. The great majority of people are living awesome lives. They're happy people, they're smiling, and they're leading great lives. Now, is Mexico safe for tourists? In 2024, Mexico had 45 million international tourists. And it's hard to find like a stat that groups all of those tourists, because there's a lot of different countries they all come from. So it's hard to find that stat that groups them all together. But just for example, in the US, what the US reported was that the homicide rate for American tourists in Mexico is 2 per every 100,000. So you being a tourist in Mexico is statistically safer for you than being in the US. And so having answered all that, going on to our next question, is Mexico safe for tourists? I think it's obvious. I think it should be obvious. In my personal opinion, it's not a risk. It's not good for business to kill tourists in general, to scare away all of that business. That's worth billions and billions of dollars. And you better believe that some of those dangerous people have their hands in some of those industries as well, 100%. Also, like, for example, if you're a white person, you have a huge advantage. Like, even if you're in an area that you shouldn't be in, these people, what they're doing is they're protecting their territories from outside cartels or just people coming in to gather information, or worse, to try to cause harm to them, right? And so they're just watching over their territories. And as much as my Spanish, I try to like make it good, like I have an accent. Like, I can't hide the fact that I'm a freaking gringo. And that serves as an advantage in that moment. Sometimes I would like to hide that. There's some scenarios where I have a disadvantage, where maybe I go to the mercado and I get charged 3 times extra for the same thing. Like, it just, that in that moment, it might have been a disadvantage, but in this moment, it's an advantage, because when I tell them I'm a gringo, they don't actually have to trust me. It's kind of just like, it's just a fact. Like, my stature, the way I look, my skin, my voice, I'm just not Mexican. And so you don't ever want to be in a place where the cartel needs to be trusting you. Where like, hey buddy, like, trust me, I'm not doing anything bad out here. Like, you never want to be in that scenario. And so if you're a Mexican, and now you are in a position where you're asking the cartel to trust you, and that's not good. Don't make their jobs any harder. And so if you're watching this and you're like, I've been wanting to go to Mexico City or Oaxaca for Dia de los Muertos, or I want to go see Chiapas and go see Cañón Sumidero. Well, I don't know. You can go, guys. Especially if it's like a tourist spot. I wouldn't even bat an eye, and I think you'll find that you'll love it. And if Mexico was as dangerous as a lot of people make it out to be, where they act viscerally like shocked that I'm alive, that like what I did was just 1000% lucky. To me, it just mathematically, it just doesn't make sense, right? Like just statistically, me coming in contact with that many different people over that course, like over that length of time, if Mexico was a war zone, if Mexico was burning to the ground like people make it seem, I literally just don't get how the numbers make sense that I would be alive. Guys, I apologize. I am out traveling for work. I look like death because I haven't slept in a long time. And I'm editing this video and I just realized that the whole end of it just kind of cut off. So I will just kind of summarize it. I think in closing, really all I want to say is that I just think Mexico is an amazing place. It's an amazing country. The people are some of the best and friendliest people I have ever seen in my life. The number of times strangers would just help me, take me into their homes. I have countless stories like that, and I just think if this video can give Mexico even just 1% of more respect in people's minds, then it'll have achieved its goal. As well for yourself, if you're planning a trip or considering going to Mexico, it's an awesome place, and there's so much to see there. So consider making a trip out there. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, we are gonna go on so many adventures. Consider subscribing. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.